An impossibly large shape walked out of the shadows from beyond the roadside. This was like nothing I'd ever seen before, and believe you me, I've seen a lot out there on those roads at night. You can call me Ray. I live in western Montana, and I work nights for a contractor the state hires to clear wrecks and to wash down blood from the road so folks don't die staring at it the next morning. We're the crew of people you don't normally see, unless you drive past us at 2 a.m., and you start to wonder why there's some guy out there spraying down a 2-lane road with something like a garden hose with a truck and a light bar on it. It's not a glamorous job. It's a lot of cones, flashers, and a tank of water and some degreaser so the next driver doesn't spin out on antifreeze and elk gore all over the road. I never figured I'd be writing to you or to anyone. I'm not a hunter, and I'm not some believer in Sasquatch by hobby. I'm just a guy with a reflective vest, a winch on the truck, and last September I saw something take my job right out of my hands. I was doing a dead pull off the highway. This was late September, and the cold air was pulling in off the river nearby. At some point, a young bull elk had gotten clipped hard out on the road, spun around, and bled out all over the fog line on the road. I situated my washdown truck, set out the cones and the arrows, and I was preparing to set up the winch, when suddenly something came out of the shadows and dragged that elk down and up over a ditch and into the trees like it was carrying a rag doll. The call came in at 11:38 p.m. I was staged in a gravel lot near the way station, drinking some really bad coffee and listening to the radiator's fan cycle. All dispatch said was, "Single vehicle versus elk, near mile 73. Trooper rolled through. Says it's cleared the lane, but it's messy. You're on wash and drag detail. No tow." That meant there was no disabled car waiting on me. The driver likely limped away or got a ride. I clicked my light bar to amber, pulled onto the highway, and let the truck hum over the miles of blacktop and the white line until I got to the incident area. That night was the first real night of fall we had had. Up here in Montana, the cold doesn't come in slow. When it arrives fast like a punch to the face. At mile 71, the temperature had dropped several notches, and my nose felt the sharpness of cold air every time I inhaled. I turned the heat on in the truck. I passed the pine mill turnoff, then the little pullout where folks pretend they weren't the ones that dumped all that trash there. And then I saw it. The shimmer and the skid on the right where the road looked greasy. You do this for so many years. You learn to look for that shimmer on the road. It's a mix of coolant, fat, and water. A little farther, and the smell suddenly hit the vents. A sharp tang of some gasoline, mixed with blood, animal hide, and all of it wrapped in cold Montana air. There was a sedan parked halfway off the shoulder with the flashers still on. The hood buckled way deep inward. No one was inside. My guess was they'd caught a ride with the trooper or had called a friend. 10 yards past the bumper, right at the fog line, there lay a young bull elk. No big rack worth writing about, but I thought it was a shame it would never get to grow bigger. The blood had that dark jelly sheen to it. That means the heart pumping is long done. A smear led from the center line to the edge where the elk slid. I rolled past the mess, braked easy, did a U-turn, and placed myself on the shoulder to not only face oncoming traffic, but so that my high beams and the light bar could light up the area for me. Then I did what I always do. Put the hazards on, walked down from the scene, placed an arrow board into a lazy left, and placed 4 cones out to push drivers away from me. And then I did a quick walk around with the flashlight to make sure there wasn't some second animal in the ditch just waiting to crawl up and surprise me. Ask me how I know to look for a second animal. That is one thing I did learn. Yeah, it's happened to me. It was quiet out there. Quiet on the highway doesn't mean silent, though. It means you hear the barely audible hiss that says a car way off is going to be there in 3 to 5 minutes. There's the light ticking from your own engine that's cooling, and there's a white hum of the river that's out beyond the cottonwoods. I keep gloves in a 5-gallon bucket and a short choker chain for grabbing legs. I swung the winch line off the fairlead on the front of my truck, walked out 20 feet of cable, and set the hook back on itself near the elk's rear hocks. I had just gotten the elk ready to cinch up when everything went sideways. I was squatted down by the elk's rear hocks, preparing the cinch, when I heard gravel shift across the ditch. This wasn't a tumble of gravel. It was a single committed foot placed with weight, grinding the gravel down and making it silent underfoot. I turned and squinted, trying to see that way, but I was in the truck's headlights, which were bright and made everything around them pitch black. The sound, though, had come from further down the way, where the headlights should light up anything moving, and I was sure the sound had come from just beyond the ditch, and possibly where the headlights couldn't reach. I was still trying to pinpoint where the sound was when I heard another gravel shift. Then I heard a heavy padding sound of something jumping from the ditch onto the shoulder of the road. Anyway, I went on high alert when I heard that paw-patting thud sound. I moved to stand by the front driver's side of my truck, which put me out of the light and let me look down into the area that I heard the sound. It was all lit up from my truck lights. I got to the truck, turned around, and I saw it. It was an impossibly large shape that walked out from the shadows from beyond the roadside. This was like nothing I'd ever seen before, and believe you me, I've seen a lot out there on those roads at night. It was about 50 feet from me, a little more, a little less. When it stepped up to the road, it was in full view of my lights. It was angled as it walked, head pushed down so the heavy brow shielded the eyes from the light. But it was walking my way, you bet it was. The light showed hair along a forearm and shoulder, and arms that ended in hands with fingers. They looked solid, full of power. Its legs were like big redwood tree trunks lifting and moving with every step. It made a beeline straight for the elk. It reached down, and it put one hand on the free end of the carcass, which was its head. If you've ever run a winch line, you know the sound the line makes when a second pull starts. The cable sang a note higher than I was making it sing. I went to the winch on the front of my truck and hit the switch to stop it. I didn't know what exactly was happening, but I knew in an instant that in a tug of war, my winch may or may not win against the thing that was down there by the elk carcass. And while I hadn't completely cinched up the elk's legs, there was still enough wrapped around the legs that perhaps it could pull back. I did not want that. I hit the switch, and the cable went slack. I yelled out, "Hey!" to it. It looked up sharply at the sound. Just the head at first, as far as it could turn, that is, which wasn't much. Then it did that whole torso turn that I've heard other people describe. It wasn't a glance, it was a full-body acknowledgement of me. It settled those eyes on me. They were dark and shiny from where I could see. There was no eye shine, though, and then it let me watch it finish what it started. One hand kept the pull. The other steadied the head by the ear and the little bit of horn that it had. In a fast and easy movement, it took the elk down the ditch and up the far bank with a sure-footedness I'd never seen in another animal carrying such weight. I've watched 4 men curse an elk carcass while they drag it 3 feet. But this thing, it dragged that bull elk like it was dragging a rag doll behind it. The ditch wasn't deep, 2 feet of it down and maybe 4 feet across and 2 up. But none of that mattered. The elk rode that slope like a sled under complete control, sliding effortlessly under the power of the creature pulling it. And yes, I did know what that creature was. I kept my left shoulder pressed to the fender near the winch drum. The winch line laid a lazy slack S between me and the elk's hind legs right now. Then I watched as they let loose of the legs, and I was thankful I hadn't completed that cinching yet. I don't know what I would have done or could have done at that point if the legs were cinched tight, but it really didn't matter. They weren't cinched, and I could now reel in my line. So I thumbed the switch to reel it in quickly and quietly. Standing to the side at the front of my truck and behind the lights, I could see farther than I could when I was in the lights in front of the truck. I stood there, and my eyes had now adjusted. I could see farther on the periphery. Standing to the side of the front of my truck and behind the lights, I could see farther than I could when I was in the lights in front of the truck. I stood there, and my eyes had now adjusted, and I could see farther on the periphery, with the faint glow ending at the line of firs that started beyond the ditch. I saw the carcass drag to those firs and disappear within them. The figure dragging it didn't turn and wave or look back like it was proud of itself. It squared the load with one small correction in how it was pulling it, then turned back around and stepped into the brush and trees. It was hidden within 3 steps past the firs. It didn't hesitate. It walked with a purpose and a certainty of exactly where it was going. I gave the arrow board 2 more clicks to push traffic farther left, even though there wasn't really any traffic to speak of. I did jump a little when the water pump motor on my spray-down kit kicked on. I waited a couple more minutes, kind of undecided. I did think of just leaving it, but that didn't feel right. I would kick myself later if I just left, and I knew it. So I got out and I walked to the edge of the ditch that the elk had been dragged off the shoulder, and I looked down without climbing down into it. Drag marks. Not 2 tidy ruts like a cart would make, but a broad polish through wet grass and silt, with a little berm of dirt built up where the ribs had caught. There weren't footprints to speak of. The ground there doesn't keep or show prints. Too much gravel, hard dirt, and covered with too many needles. I waited 10 minutes more with only 2 cars passing the whole time. Then I washed the lane because, well, that's my job. I sprayed the radiator splatter off the park sedan's fender because I knew in the morning it would make some kids on a school bus think about it all day if I didn't. Our hose is weak, and the air was colder than the water liked, and I watched the steam come off the pavement. Then I stood and I just listened. The highway hissed again in the distance, and the river was still making its noise. Up the little path where the elk had gone, I didn't hear a thing. Not a twig, not a snap, not a branch moving. The only hint that anything lived out there was the way the willow branches stayed slightly parted, like they had been trained to stay that way, and maybe they had been. I coiled my line, set the hook back in the cradle, killed the arrow board, and pulled the last cone back to my truck. I wasn't shaking and terrified, but I was thinking about what I had just seen the entire time. Logic told me if the Sasquatch had been hungry, it now had the elk, and it probably wouldn't bother with a human that probably tastes like its flesh had been marinating in dark beer and atomic hot wings for years, because it had been. And if it had meant to do something to me, I figure it would have done it. Then it would have taken the elk if it still wanted it. But no, it came. It took the elk, and it left. I wondered how long it had been there. Was it on its way down from the firs when I pulled up and interrupted? Had it heard the collision from far away and waited till everyone else left to come and get the elk, and then I came along and botched that plan? And if so, why did it come for the elk with just me there, but not when the other people were there? Did it realize that I was going to take the elk, and then it stepped in? So many things I wonder about. I drove back to the gravel lot and filled out the little electronic form that dispatch wants. It asks for remarks. There's a drop-down menu. It gives you 3 choices under wildlife presence: none, bear, and other. I chose other. In the notes I typed, carcass removed from lane by wildlife prior to wash. Drag path into timber at east side of shoulder. Now that's the truth without getting me a call from my supervisor, who would then suddenly not want to go have beer and wings with me on the weekends anymore after I told him about that particular wildlife. I went home at the end of my shift, my mind still thinking everything over. Every second of that event replayed again and again in my head like some video on a loop. My wife, Beth, asked if it had been a bad one, meaning a fatality. I told her, elk, not people. And that was the unit that we measured good and bad by in our kitchen. I hesitated for another minute, and then I said, well, something dragged that elk off into the trees. Real easy, like it was dragging a rag doll. No effort at all. I sipped my coffee and waited. Beth sat down across the table from me and asked me what I thought did it. I told her I didn't have to think or guess what did it. I saw it. And I told her. She asked me a lot of questions, but after 18 years of marriage, she knew I wasn't pulling her leg. I don't do that to her or anyone. Beth looked at me and very evenly said, well, don't go back there looking for anything. What you've seen is proof enough, isn't it? I nodded. I agreed, because it was enough. Now, I didn't sleep bad. I woke later that afternoon with daylight jabbing through the blinds. My first thought, though, was that if I don't go back and look at things in the light of day, my mind will start making up a better story than the one that really happened. I don't know why my mind does that, but it often does. It will gloss over things and make them smoother and nicer. Anyway, I told Beth I was going to go make a run for some fresh coffee. It was a ridiculous excuse. I knew it, and so did Beth, but it was the best I could come up with. If anyone won't abide stale coffee in our house, it's Beth. Me, I drink coffee that tastes like battery acid. So stale coffee wouldn't send me out like that. But it was the best I could cobble together quickly. Beth listened and just nodded, and then she said, you mind your P's and Q's out there. You hear me? She gave me a hard stare. I nodded. That's how Beth says, I love you, and to be careful. The afternoon light made mile 73 look like any mile of a 2-lane road in Montana. Nothing special to see. I pulled into the same shoulder that I'd used the night before, though I didn't turn my truck around, of course. I shut the truck off, and I listened to the silence out there for several minutes. Then I got out, and I walked over to the ditch. The drag polish was still there, though less defined after so many hours, but still mostly intact, as I'd been careful to direct my wash away from it. The berm of silt where the ribs had caught was flatter. You could see where something heavy had gone up the little path, and where it stepped wider than a deer would choose to avoid a rotten stump. But it wasn't a row of cast-me kind of pictures. It was scuffed earth with just a hint of what had happened there. I did take one photo with my phone anyway, but none of the details showed in the picture. I would have needed a real camera with a good lens, not my cheap Android phone camera. I didn't climb up the path, not because I was being respectful and leaving the Sasquatch to its territory undisturbed. Not at all. I didn't go up that path because I was not armed, and I thought that if I went chasing through there after it, I would either come back a very changed man or possibly not come back at all. I knew then Beth was right. What I had seen was proof enough. I took one last look up the line of firs and over to the willow that looked like it was eternally parted. Then I got back in my truck and drove home. I had been home probably more than an hour when I realized I hadn't stopped to get a bag of coffee to make my cover story look real. I know Beth noticed, but she never said a word. I know you and your listeners want face and teeth and lengths measured precisely, but here's what I can give you. It stood taller than the roof of my washed-down truck. Now that roof comes to a few inches above my head when I'm standing right next to the door. From the distance between us, the Sasquatch still had a good foot to foot and a half or more of height on me. I am 5 feet 10 inches, and the distance and perspective make it tough to put a height to it, but I'm going to go with between 7 and possibly up to 8 feet tall. It was more than twice as wide as me, and sure was a heck of a lot more solid. The head sat down on the collarbones. It had the impression of the same kind of silhouette my teenage son has when he's all geared up for football. The head is down near the shoulders. The brow threw a shadow down to cover the eyes when it just tilted its chin a bit. I didn't get eye reflection because my beams were straight, and it wasn't looking at me the way a deer stares. The mouth didn't snarl. It never opened. It never showed me anything that I can give you any detail about. I didn't see its mouth. It kept its mouth shut the whole time as far as I could see. The hands. Now listen, I work with hands. I grew up with my dad and grandfather who were ranchers, and those men had hands that were strong, powerful, and huge. So I noticed things like hands and knuckles. I saw the hands grip that elk. The hands were big, with an opposable thumb just like ours, and 4 fingers also placed just like ours, but 3 or 4 times larger all around. I'm not certain about the palms of the hands, but the backs of the hands and the fingers that I saw were covered in the same fur, which, by the way, seemed to be a dark reddish brown. Its walk was steady, sure-footed, even on sloping and uneven ground. It waltzed over terrain that I would have had to lean far forward and do a sideways scramble motion just to get up. Not that Sasquatch, though. It just went right up like Scarlett O'Hara on some big staircase. As for the smell, I didn't notice any. It didn't threaten me, and it didn't do anything except take a free meal off a busy road. It gave me exactly one long look, and it didn't pay me any more mind. It didn't make any sounds. It didn't growl or show its teeth. I didn't get any of the things that other people say they get when they meet a Sasquatch. He was just picking up, I guess, his version of Uber Eats. The next night I went back out, right down that same stretch of road, because I had to. That's where the job took me. I answered the calls that dispatch sent, set my cones and arrow signs, picked up some dead deer, some raccoons, and, sadly, someone's dog. I sent the dog's tag over to animal control. I sprayed the blood off the road and did what I could. I stood in that same mile one time to check a piece of truck tire that looked like a snake. The willows and the firs stayed silent, and that suited me just fine. I like my job most nights. I don't like seeing the dead animals, but I do try to think that getting their bodies off the road is a kindness I can do for them. I like when it's just me, my hose, and a mess I can make into less of a mess. That night at mile 73, I had some help that I didn't ask for from something that probably thinks I'm the one who was late to the job. Well, I gave you my first name. Let's leave it at that. The elk is gone. The road is clean. If that Sasquatch lives out there past the firs and thinks of the 2-lane road as just a place to cross and not a place to dine, that's all the better for all of us. I'll do my part with a hose and some cones, and it can do its part with hands that move a couple 100 pounds of meat up a ditch and through the slopes like it's dragging a rag doll. Thanks for reading this. Ray, Western Montana. P.S. For any of you listeners out there who do the work that nobody wants to look at in the daylight, keep the truck between you and the timbers. Run your cones wider than you think you need to. And if something taller than the cab decides to finish your drag, thumb off the winch and let it do whatever it wants. All right, my Sasquatch, that was Ray's story, and what a story. It was a pretty good one. Now, you might think we're done for tonight. Nope, we're not. I have 2 more comments left on videos recently that I want to share with you. Are you ready? Here we go. Bartending at Lake of the Woods in Oregon. The employee camping is shy of 2 miles north of the resort by trail or over 5 miles by road. So I walked at 3 to 4 a.m. Yes, a lone female walking alone in the dark. Halfway, Pitch black, little flashlight with weak batteries. About 15 feet off the trail to my 2 o'clock, I hear a large snap up in the trees about 20 feet up. Hear a few more small snaps halfway down. Then the large branch hit the ground, followed immediately by a huge crash, thud, and exhale, like the wind was knocked out of a moose. The ground shook like a semi-truck had been dropped from a crane. Then, whatever it was, plowed through the thick forest like a freight train. I just kept walking like nothing was nothing, telling myself it must have been a moose. Problem? Moose do not climb trees. In 2016, my unit was on a woodland training evolution in a state in the Pacific Northwest at night. Mission set was an off-target insertion training with ISR assets. We jumped and set security, made sure we were good to go, and started the hoof. We made it to the second rally point and made our check-in call when the TOC responded. They told us there were 3 heat signatures on ISR about 700 to 800 yards to our west and had been paralleling us for the last 2 miles. TOC said they initially thought it was wildlife because the area is restricted for military use and remote. But they could now tell whatever they were bipedal. But the SIGs were way too big to be people. They advised we stay the course and stay hidden, and if evasive measures were needed, they would let us know. Point man let us out, and we continued on. About 20 minutes later, the TOC broke radio silence again, which is rare, and told us they initially thought SIGs were now in a sort of diamond formation, moving lateral to us, and were now only 300 to 400 yards off. By this time, we started to hear loud screams and these deep guttural howls. It was a weird sound. We all thought maybe there's people out here trespassing, camping, or whatever. But because we carry live rounds on these trainings, the last thing we wanted was for a group of possibly armed civilians to walk up on us at night in the woods and freak out. We got advised that our initial route was compromised and to deviate to the next contingency route. We ended up getting to target and finishing. But that next day, nobody in command brought it up in debrief or told us what happened or what was in the woods that we heard. Once we were able to really sit down and watch the ISR video, we all noticed the heat signature that moved away from the other 2 was fast, way too fast. Based on ISR tracking, the SIG was moving around 20 to 24 miles per hour and had the heat signature of a damn polar bear. Not one single person in command acknowledged what happened, and when I joked about not having the clearance high enough to know what command knew, he looked at me and said, "I don't care about your clearance. You can tell whoever you want these days because more than half won't believe you, and the other half won't care to believe it." Long story short, these days I'm 100% sure we got stalked by a group of big feet. You know, folks, I love finding these kinds of comments, but I'm always afraid that I'm missing some of these comments. I do try to read them all, but it is possible. I get a couple hundred a day across all the videos on this channel. It's possible I do miss some. So as much as I don't mind you putting things in the comments, I love it. If you do have a story that you would like to tell, go ahead and send it to me at contact@buckeyebigfoot.com. That way, I'll be sure to see it. All right. Well, I just have one more thing I'm going to mention for you. I recently mentioned doing a live stream, and I've asked for questions to be sent in. Thank you, because I've already had a couple of questions sent in. So if you have a question you would like me to answer on the live stream, you can send it to me also at contact@buckeyebigfoot.com. Or you know what, better yet, show up the night of the live stream and ask it then. I'm going to schedule the live stream for next Sunday, November 30th, 2025. It'll probably be about 6 p.m. I hope by then all the fuss and fury of the Thanksgiving holiday here in the States will have settled down for all of us a little bit. Well, I think that's going to wrap it up for tonight, everyone. Until we meet up again, always remember, absence of proof is not proof of absence. Thanks for listening.